Long before the light, before even the first grey thought of it in the east, the village by the river is asleep, and the great river itself is the only thing awake. It moves in the dark as it has always moved, wide and slow and certain, sliding northward through the black land toward a sea that no one in the village has ever seen. There is no hurry in it, and no sound but the soft one it makes against the mud banks. A low and endless voice under everything, so old and so constant that the sleeping people no longer hear it at all, the way a man does not hear his own breath. It has been here longer than the village, longer than the fields, longer than the memory of the oldest grandmother's oldest story. It was here before there were people to give it a name, and it will be here after. And everyone in the little houses along its bank sleeps easier for it, though not one of them, if you woke them and asked, could quite say why. The house is small and low and made of the river itself, of mud brought up in baskets and shaped into brick and dried hard in the sun, so that a family lives, in the end, inside the dried banks of the Nile, warmed all night by walls that were water a season ago. Inside it is dark and close and warm. The family sleeps together in the one main room and on the flat roof above when the nights are hot. The man and his wife and the children and the grandmother breathing slowly in the dark, and near them, just beyond a low wall of the same mud brick, the animals breathe too, so that the whole household, people and beasts alike, passes the night as one warm and sleeping thing under one low roof. The air is cool now, in this last hour of the dark, cooler than it will be again until tomorrow's dawn. A little breath of it moves down off the desert and along the river and in through the small high window, and it smells of the things it always smells of here, of silt and green growing things and wood smoke long gone cold, of the beasts and the bread and the river mud. It is the smell of the whole world to the child asleep against the warm side of the ox, for the child has never smelled any other and never expects to, and is perfectly content. Somewhere out in the dark a heron stirs in the reeds and settles again. A dog, half asleep across a doorway 3 houses down, lifts its head at nothing, listens to the nothing, and lays it down. The river slides on. And above it all, in a sky of a blackness that a later and brighter age will never see, the stars burn down enormous and clear and slow, wheeling their great slow wheel toward morning, the same stars the grandmother watched as a girl and her grandmother before her, turning above the same river, above the same low roofs, above the same sleeping and untroubled dark. There is a long, deep stillness now, the deepest of the whole night, the hour when even the river seems to hold its breath. Nothing moves, nothing is asked of anyone. The work of yesterday is done and put away, and the work of today has not yet begun, and in the warm gap between them the whole village lies suspended, safe, asleep, held in the great cupped hand of the dark and the river, while the east, very slowly, so slowly that no one could say when it began, begins to think about turning grey. The dawn does not break here so much as it seeps gently up out of the east, a paling of the black to grey and the grey to a soft and rising gold, and the first thing it touches, always, is the river. The water, which was black all night, begins to hold the light before the land does. It lies there in the growing dawn like a long ribbon of polished metal, still and pale and luminous, mist lying low upon it in soft white banks that the first warmth will lift and carry off. The far bank, the whole line of the desert cliffs beyond, stands rose and violet in the early light, and turns, as the sun considers rising, to a warm and dusty gold. Nothing hurries it. The light comes up over the world the way honey moves in a jar, slow and thick and golden, filling the low places last. And with the light, the river wakes, and its creatures with it. The birds come first, as they always do. A heron lifts from the reeds on great slow wings and beats away low over the water, trailing its legs. Somewhere the ibis are stirring, and the little birds in the tamarisk begin their small and tuneless morning talk. A kingfisher sits on a leaning reed, still as a painted thing, watching the pale water out in one slow ring widen and fade. The reeds along the bank, the tall papyrus and the rushes stand utterly still in the windless air, each one doubled in the mirror of the water, so that there seem to be two worlds, the real one and its gentle twin hanging beneath it, and no way, in this light, to say which is which. A boat goes by, far out, a small dark fishing boat of bundled reeds, and the man in it stands and poles it slowly along, and the sound of the pole dipping and lifting carries across the still water, small and clear, the first work sound of the day. He lifts a hand, perhaps, to no one in particular, to the morning itself, and the reeds take him slowly out of sight, and the ring of his passing smooths away, and the river is glass again. The light climbs. It finds the tops of the palm trees first and sets them glowing, then slides down their trunks and out across the fields, and the whole green world along the water begins, quietly, to shine. The dew is heavy on everything, on every blade and frond, and for this one brief hour the fields are hung with it. A field of small, bright waters, each drop holding its own tiny sun. It will be gone within the hour, burned off by the climbing warmth. But for now the world is new-washed and glittering and cool, and it belongs, for a little while yet, only to the river and the birds and the light. And then, at last, the sun itself lifts clear of the eastern cliffs, round and red and enormous, and lays a long bright road of gold straight down the water toward the waking village, as it has done every single morning since the beginning of the world. The people of the river have 100 things to say about that sun, and 100 names, and see in its faithful daily rising the greatest of all comforts and the plainest of all promises. But the ox blinking in the byre, and the heron on its reed, and the child now stirring on the warm roof, know only that it is warm, and that it has come again, as it always comes, and that the day, the ordinary and unhurried and sufficient day, has begun. The house wakes slowly, and from the bottom up, for the first one stirring, always, is the wife, down in the dark, warm kitchen corner before the light is well up, kneeling at the hearth to wake the fire. It has slept the night under its blanket of ash, a few red coals kept alive at the heart of it, and she feeds it now with a handful of dry dung and a few splinters of precious wood, and leans and breathes on it, patiently, the old soft breath that every woman in the village breathes at this hour, until the coals redden and catch and a small clear flame stands up and takes hold. The light of it moves on the low mud walls. The smoke of it rises straight and blue and finds its slow way out through the roof, joining, as the light grows, all the other thin blue threads rising from all the other roofs, so that the whole village seems to breathe together in the still morning air. For the two great labours of the house are bread and beer, and they are, in truth, nearly the same labour, for they begin in the same grain and end as the twin foundations of every single day. The grain is emmer wheat and barley, kept in the cool dark of a mud bin, and the getting of the flour is the first hard work of the morning. The woman kneeling to the saddle quern, the flat worn stone, and rolling the smaller stone back and forth, grinding the grain to meal, an ache in the shoulders and the back that every woman here has carried all her life and thinks nothing of. It is slow work and rhythmic, and the soft grating of the stones is one of the first sounds of the waking street. That and the low voices and the fire, and somewhere a donkey remarking on the morning, "The bread is made simply, and it is made every day, for it does not keep in this heat, and no one wishes it to." The dough is mixed in a wide clay bowl, flour and water and a little of yesterday's dough to lift it, and worked and shaped into round flat loaves, and baked, some of it slapped onto the hot outside of the clay oven, some set on the coals, some in little pottery moulds stood up around the fire. And the smell of it fills the house and drifts out into the lane and mixes with the smell of every other baking loaf in the village, and there is no one, in any age of the world, who has smelled fresh bread baking in the cool of the morning and not felt somewhere under the breastbone that the world is fundamentally a good place, and that things will, on the whole, be well. And the beer is the bread's brother. It is made from the same loaves, lightly baked and then crumbled and soaked in water in the great vats, and left to work in the warm, thick and sweet, and only softly strong, more a food than a drink, and everyone drinks it. The man in the field and the wife at her grinding and the children too, for it is safer and kinder than the river water, and it carries a body through the long day's work. A jar of beer and a round of warm bread, an onion perhaps, a handful of dates, and that is the morning meal, taken quickly, sitting on the floor or standing in the doorway, looking at the light, not much said, for the day is waiting, and there will be time to talk in the heat of noon. The children eat last and most, cross-legged on the swept earth floor, tearing the warm bread, and are sent out blinking into the brightening lane. The man drinks off his beer and takes up the bread wrapped in a cloth that his wife has readied for the field. And the wife, who was first awake, does not sit at all, but eats a little as she works, moving already to the next thing and the next. For her day, which began before all the others, will end after them too, and she has long since stopped expecting otherwise, and does not mind, and would not, if you asked her, know quite how to answer the question. When the bread is eaten and the light is full, the men go out to the fields, for in this country the fields begin where the houses end, sharp and sudden as a line drawn with a stick. For there are two lands here, and every child knows them, and they lie side by side the whole length of the world. There is the black land, the Kemet, the dark rich soil. The river lays down fresh each year, and it is life itself, and everything grows in it, and it is never more than a few thousand paces wide, a narrow green ribbon unrolled along both banks of the water, and beyond it, close enough to walk to in a morning, close enough to see from the field's edge shimmering in its own heat, there is the red land, the desert, the deshret, where nothing grows and nothing lives, and no one goes without good reason. A man may stand with one foot on black soil, dark and damp and crumbling and sweet, and the other on red sand, dry as bone, and that is the whole truth of this country in a single stride. Life and not life, the gift and the waste, divided by a line you could draw with your heel. The man walks out into the black land in the cool of the morning while the walking is still good, along the raised path between the fields, past his neighbours going out to theirs, a word here, a lifted hand there, the ox plodding ahead or the donkey small and patient under its load of tools. His fields are not large, a few strips of the dark earth, but they are enough in a good year, in this generous soil, and he knows every handspan of them, where the ground lies low and holds the water, where it rises and dries too fast, the good corner and the stubborn one, the way a man knows the faces of his own children. And it is the river that has made it all. And everyone knows that too, and never forgets it. For once each year the river rises in the great flood, and comes up over all its banks and spreads out across the whole lowland and covers the fields entirely, and lies upon them for weeks, brown and patient and deep. And then it goes down again, slowly, drawing back into its channel, and leaves behind it, over everything, a fresh new skin of black mud, soft and moist and rich beyond the dreaming of any farmer in a harder country. It asks no dung, this soil, and little rest. The river feeds it new every year, for nothing, out of its own body, and the people have only to open the ground and drop the seed and keep the water on it, and it gives and gives and gives. There is no other country in the world quite like it, though the man in the field does not know this, having never seen another, and takes the miracle for the plain, ordinary way of things, which is exactly what, to him, it is. So he comes to his field in the early light, and sets down his water jar in the shade of the low bank, and stands a moment at the edge of his own dark earth, looking at it, reading it, the way he does every morning. The young grain stands green and tender in its long straight rows, or the ground lies dark and turned and waiting according to the season. The channels run bright between the beds. A white egret picks its careful way along a furrow, hunting. The date palms stand along the field's edge, tall and still. And beyond, always, the red hills shimmer in their heat, and the green land lies between them and the river like a long, cool breath held across the middle of the burning world, and the man takes up his tool and bends to the first task, and the day's true work begins. The work of these fields, above every other work, is the work of water, the lifting and leading and letting go of it, for the black land gives everything if it is watered, and nothing if it is not. And the river, which gives the water, does not always give it where a man's field happens to lie. So the whole green country is laced with channels, a patient web of them, great ones and small ones, dug and cleaned and mended year upon year, running the river's water back among the fields and holding it in wide, shallow basins bounded by low banks of earth. In the weeks after the flood goes down, the water lies trapped in these basins, soaking the soil deep. And the farmer's art is all in the guiding of it, opening a bank here with 3 strokes of the hoe to let the water run through into the next field, closing it there with a heel and a handful of mud, leading the precious stuff along the little ditches to the roots of the growing times, and the loose ponever ordered in the feuds a years of the growing things, an inch at a time, patiently, all morning. And when the river is low and the field lies above it, there is the shadoof, and the long, slow music of it goes up and down the river bank all through the dry months. It is a simple thing, a long pole balanced across an upright post, a leather bucket hung from one end, and a lump of dried mud for a weight at the other, and a man stands at the water and works it, hour upon hour, in a rhythm as old and as steady as breathing. He pulls the bucket down to the river, and it fills, and he lets the weight swing it up again, and he tips the water out into the channel that runs to his field, and lets the bucket back down to the river, and fills it, and swings it up. Down and up and out. Down and up and out. The wet leather creaks. The water pours and gleams. The counterweight thuds softly on its post. And a man may raise the whole river to his fields this way, a bucket at a time, and think of nothing or of everything, his body swinging in the old groove of the work while his mind goes wandering where it likes, and the sun climbs, and the water runs down the channel dark and bright into the thirsty earth. There is a deep contentment in this work, for all that it is heavy, because a man can see it doing good. The dry bed drinks. The wilting leaf by evening stands up again. He is not fighting the land here, as men fight it in harder countries, wringing a crop from it by force. He is only tending something that wants to grow, keeping the water moving, playing his small part in a great and generous machine that the river drives and the sun warms and the soil remembers. The channels have run this way since before his grandfather. They will run this way after his grandsons. He clears the season's silt from them and mends the broken bank and opens and closes the little gates of earth, and the water does the rest, as it has always done, sliding cool and quiet among the roots of the world. By the time the sun stands high, the water is lead and the beds are dark and drinking, and the man straightens and presses his hands into the small of his back, and looks over the shining wet field with the plain satisfaction of a thing well done. The egret has moved on. The channel murmurs faintly to itself. The green rows stand a little greener already, or so he chooses to believe. And the river, the great slow mother of it all, slides on past the end of the field toward its far-off sea, careless and enormous and kind. With more water in a single moment of its passing than all the fields of all the villages could drink in 100 years, and never even notices that it has been asked to share. And while the man is out along the channels in the climbing heat, the house behind him has not fallen quiet, for the wife has her own day, and it is as full as his, and it moves to the same unhurried rhythm from the same grey dawn. Her morning began at the hearth, as every morning does, and the grinding and the baking and the brewing are only the first of it. When the men have gone, she turns to the long, soft round of the household, and the first of it, always, is water. She takes up the tall jar and balances it on her hip or her shoulder and walks down with the other women to the river or the village well, and fills it, and carries it home again, the cool weight of it swaying against her, the wet rim darkening her dress. And she will do this many times before the day is out, for the house drinks water all day long, for the beer and the bread and the washing and the beasts and the little garden by the door. The house itself must be kept, and she keeps it. Sweeping the swept earth floor with a bundle of palm ribs until it is smooth and clean and cool underfoot, tending the small shrine in its niche in the wall where the household god stands, the friendly dwarf god who guards the sleeping family and the mother in childbirth and the little children, and before whom she sets each day a crumb of bread and a drop of beer and a word or two, said low, half a prayer and half a conversation with an old friend. The linen is washed at the river's edge, beaten clean on the smooth stones and spread on the warm bank to dry white in the sun. The children are fed and wiped and settled and set to their small tasks. And through all of it, whenever her hands are free of anything else, there is the spinning and the weaving, the flax turned to thread and the thread to the fine pale linen that clothes them all. Work that never quite ends and never needs to be hurried. And there is the cooking, which grows all day toward the evening meal, the slow heart of the household's care. She has her round of clay pots and her few good things, a handful of onions and garlic strung in the corner, a basket of dates, a jar of oil, dried fish, the greens from the garden, and now and then, on a good day, a piece of meat or a fresh-caught fish from the river. The pot murmurs on the fire. The smell of it builds through the afternoon and drifts out into the lane. Nothing in it is grand, and all of it is enough. And she moves among her pots and her jars with the sure, unthinking ease of a woman doing the thing her mother did and her mother before her, in the same corner of the same kind of house, all the long way back. The other women are never far. The lane between the houses is a river of its own, of talk and small business and passing children. And the wife is in and out of it all day, a word over the low wall, a hand lent at a neighbour's oven, the news of the village carried gently from door to door, with the borrowed pinch of salt and the returned bowl. A woman here is never alone with her work, and never quite finished with it either. And by the time the light begins to soften and lengthen and the men come back up from the fields, the water is carried, and the house is swept, and the god is fed, and the thread is spun, and the supper is breathing its warm, good smell into the cooling air. All of it done, none of it noticed, the way the truly needful things so often are. The children of the village belong to the river and the sun and the open lanes, and they run half wild and brown and mostly happy through a world that asks little of them yet, and gives them a great deal. The smallest go naked in the heat, as all small children here do, a side lock of hair left long on their shaved heads, and they play in the dust of the lane and the shallows at the river's edge under the loose and watchful eye of whatever mother or grandmother is nearest. They make boats of a curled leaf and float them on the still backwaters. They model little animals and little men from the river clay, as their fathers once did, and set them in the sun to dry, and are inconsolable when they crack and make more. They chase the goats and are chased by the geese, which are larger than they are, and entirely without fear. And they learn early and for life the exact distance a cross goose can be trusted not to cross. And they are given their small tasks, for a child here grows into work the way it grows into everything, gradually and without much noticing. They carry water in little jars sized to their strength. They gather the dried dung for the fire and glean the dropped grain at harvest, and drive the birds from the ripening fields with slings and shouts, which is work, and is also, if you are a small boy with a whole bright morning and a field full of pigeons, very nearly the best thing in the world. They mind the smaller ones. They run the messages up and down the lane, and the older girls fall in beside their mothers at the grinding stone and the loom and the cooking fire, learning with their hands a little more each season, until the knowing is simply in them. There are no letters for most of them, and no need of any, for the world they must learn is not in books but in days, and they read it fluently long before they are grown, the turning of the seasons and the moods of the river, the names of the birds and the fish and the stars, how the bread is made and the beer is brewed and the flax is worked and the beast is tended. A few, a very few, the clever sons of scribes and officials are sent to the temple school to learn the hard, beautiful craft of writing, to sit cross-legged and copy the signs onto smoothed boards and broken potsherds until their backs ache and their masters are satisfied. And to them a different life will open, of clean hands and cool offices and a name that may outlast them. But for most, the learning is the lane and the field and the river, and it is enough, and more than enough, and they never feel the lack of any other. By the drowsy middle of the afternoon, the smallest of them are done, quite suddenly, the way small children are, folding up mid-play into sleep wherever they happen to be, in a patch of shade by the wall, in the warm dust, in a mother's lap, the flies walking undisturbed on their round brown cheeks. The world they sleep in is very small and entirely whole. A few houses, a stretch of river, a green edge of fields, and every face in it is known to them, and every path leads home. And when they wake, they will run out into it again, into the long gold of the falling afternoon, and it will still be exactly there, unchanged, waiting, as they always is, as they will half expect it to be their whole lives long. Beyond the low mud wall at the back of the house, where the family's warmth ends and another warmth begins, live the animals, and no account of the household would be whole without them, for they are woven through every hour of its day. The greatest of them are the cattle, the oxen that draw the plough and tread the grain and carry the heavy loads, mild, vast, patient creatures, the colour of the river mud, and they are valued and tended accordingly, watered and fed and rubbed down and spoken to softly. For a man's cattle are his wealth made flesh and his hard labour halved. The ox knows its master's voice and its master's hand and the long familiar round of its work, and leans into the yoke at the old word, and plods the field or the threshing floor at the same unhurried pace it has kept all its life, and asks for nothing but its feed and its water and a little shade in the worst of the heat, and gives, in return, the strength that turns the soil that feeds them all. Then the donkeys, small and grey and enduring, the tireless carriers of everything, of grain and water and firewood, and the whole family too, on the long road to market, picking their neat sure way under loads that seem far too great for them, patient past all patience, and abused sometimes, and loved too in the rough off-hand way of people who could not manage a single day without them. There are goats, nimble and mischievous and forever where they should not be, giving their milk and their kids and eating, cheerfully, absolutely anything. There are the pigs in some yards, and the sheep, and always, everywhere, the birds, the ducks, and the geese and the pigeons, kept in their mud-brick coats for their eggs and their flesh, filling the yard and the lane with their fuss and their gabble, from first light to last. And the beasts and the people live close, closer than any later age will think quite proper, sharing the one enclosure, the one warmth, the one round of the day. The animals' sounds are the household's other voice, always there under the human sounds, the low of the ox and the complaint of the donkey and the endless soft conversation of the ducks, so constant that no one hears it until it stops. Their smell is the smell of home. Their warmth, on the cold desert nights of winter, is a real and welcome thing, banked against the family like a second hearth. The child that fell asleep in the dust wakes with its head against the flank of the patient ox and thinks nothing of it. For the ox is family, as much as the grandmother in the corner, and knows it, and turns its great, mild head, and breathes out slowly into the child's hair, and goes back to its chewing. Last thing before the dark, someone goes out to them, the man or the eldest son, with a look and a word and a hand laid flat on a warm side, checking the water, forking down the fodder, seeing that all is shut and safe against the night and the jackals that call from the desert edge. The beasts shift and settle in the near dark. The ox sighs its great sigh. And the household, all of it, the people and the cattle and the birds and the little household god in his niche, draws in together under the low roof against the coming night. one warmth, one shelter, one family in the oldest and widest sense of the word. At the side of the house, where a little water can be led to it and coaxed to stay, lies the garden, small and square and green and beloved. And it is the wife's kingdom and the household's daily table, and one of the plainest pleasures of the whole year's round. It is not large, for every handspan of it must be watered by hand or by the patient guiding of the channel. But it is made to give and give. Onions and garlic grow here in their neat close rows, and leeks, and the long green cucumbers, and the round melons that a child will steal warm from the vine and eat where it stands, and beans and lentils and chickpeas, and the dark leaves of greens for the pot, and the herbs along the edges, coriander and dill and cumin, the small savours that make the daily bread and pottage into something a family looks forward to. The wife works it in the cool of the morning, and again in the falling evening, on her knees in the dark, soft earth, weeding and tending, and leading the thread of water from root to root, and the garden knows her hands and answers them. And there is no gardener in any age of the world who has not felt, kneeling so, the quiet, deep satisfaction of a thing tended and thriving under her own two hands. And standing over the garden and the house and the whole green strip of the world are the date palms, tall and grey-trunked and ancient, their great feathered crowns hanging still in the windless air far overhead. They are the most generous trees a family can own. They ask nothing, having found the water far down for themselves, and they give, year upon year, without fail, the heavy hanging clusters of dates that ripen golden and then deep amber brown in the late summer heat, sweet as honey, the one true sweetness of this world, eaten fresh, dried and stored against the lean times, pressed into cakes, brewed into a strong, sweet drink for the feast days. A man will climb the notched trunk with a rope and a knife to cut down the ripe clusters, high up in the rustling crown with the whole green country and the shining river spread out small beneath him, and hand the sweetness down. And the palm gives more than its fruit, for nothing of it is wasted. The great fronds are cut for the roofing of the house and the weaving of the baskets and the mats and the fences, and split into ribs for the brooms and the crates, and their fibre is twisted into the rope that binds the whole working world together. The trunk, when at last a tree dies, becomes a beam. There is a saying, or there might as well be, that the palm has as many uses as there are days in the year, and the family that lives beneath one lives, in a real sense, off it, roofed and swept and fenced and sweetened by the single patient tree that stands over the house and hums all through the still hot afternoons with the coming and going of the bees. The other trees stand about the edges of things. The sycamore fig, with its dense and blessed shade, the pomegranate, the little grapevine, trained over a frame by the door, to make a green and dappled roof to sit beneath. Together they make the household's own small grove, its shade and its sweetness and its shelter. And on the hottest afternoons, the whole family gravitates to it to the deep green shadow under the sycamore. And there is nowhere in the wide, bright, burning country they would rather be. By the middle of the day, the sun stands directly overhead, small and white and pitiless, and the whole green land lies flattened and silent beneath it, and everything that can stop working stops. The heat is a physical thing now, a weight, a presence, lying on the fields and the river and the low roofs, like a hand pressed down. The air shimmers and swims above the far red hills and the bright water. The colours bleach out of the world toward white. Nothing moves that does not have to. The birds have fallen silent in the deep of the tamarisk. The cattle stand nose to tail in what shade they can find, tails swinging slow against the flies, eyes half shut. Even the river seems to slow, lying flat and blinding and still under the vertical light. This is the dead hour, the hour the whole country has learned, over uncounted generations, simply to give back to the sun and wait out in the shade, in stillness, until the worst of it passes. So the man leaves the field. He has been up since before the light and has done a long morning's work, and now, in the unspoken wisdom of the country, he stops and comes in out of the glare to the shade of the house wall or the deep green shadow under the sycamore, and eats a little bread and onion and dates and a long draught of the mild beer, and then he lies down on a mat in the coolest corner he can find and sleeps. All along the village, in the shuttered dimness of the houses and the shade of the walls and the palms, people are lying down through the worst of the heat, the old and the young and the hard-working alike, giving the white hours to sleep, so that the whole village drowses together through the middle of the day as it drowsed together through the middle of the night. Inside the thick mud walls it is dim and blessedly cool, for the mud brick that held the winter cold at bay holds the summer heat at bay too, and the house in the worst of the afternoon is a kind of cave, shadowed and still, the light coming in only in a few blinding slots through the small high windows and lying in hard bright bars across the floor. A baby sleeps, the grandmother sleeps, sitting up, her spinning fallen still in her lap. A cat, that half-wild honoured guest of every Egyptian house, is stretched full length in the coolest shadow, boneless, utterly at peace, and no one would dream of disturbing it. The pot has been drawn back from the low fire. The whole household breathes slow, and there is no guilt in it, and no waste, for this is simply how the day is shaped here, into two working halves with a still centre, the cool of the morning and the cool of the evening bracketing the great white silence of the noon. It is the sun that rules the hours, not the man, and the man has long since stopped arguing and lies now in the striped shade with his hat over his eyes and his breathing gone deep and even, and lets the heat pour down and the afternoon stand still and drifts, half dreaming, on the edge of sleep, while somewhere close by the water still trickles faintly along the channel to the roots of the growing things, patient and cool and unhurried, doing in the shade the quiet work that needs no hands at all. Not every hand in the village works the soil, for a settlement of any size grows its own small company of makers, and their work goes on quietly at the edges of the day, in doorways and yards and open sheds, and the whole life of the place leans upon it. First among them, and oldest, is the potter, and his craft is the plainest marriage of the two great gifts of this country, the river's mud and the sun's fire. He works at the edge of the village, near the water, where the good clay is, and a child never tires of watching him. He treads the clay with his feet, mixing it with water and a little sand and straw, until it is smooth and dark and willing, and then he sits to his wheel, the low turning disc that his boy spins for him, and he takes up a lump of the wet earth and sets it at the centre and lays his hands upon it, and the miracle begins. The formless mud rises between his palms, wet and gleaming, and steadies and opens and becomes, under fingers that no longer need to think, a cup, a bowl, a tall, slender jar for the beer, a great round vessel for the grain, wall thinning and rim curling and shape swelling, as if the clay itself remembered what it wished to be. And when the wheel stops, there stands a thing that was mud a moment ago and is now a vessel. And it is set in the sun to harden and then stacked in the great kiln and fired, and comes out ringing and hard and orange red, ready to carry the water and the bread and the beer of 100 ordinary days. And the others work near him, each to his own long-learned craft. The carpenter, that patient and honoured man, for good wood is scarce and dear in this country of mud and reeds, and every plank of it comes far down the river or across the desert at great cost, so that a carpenter wastes nothing and joins with cunning and mends the old before he cuts the new. And the smell of his yard is the clean, sharp smell of worked wood, and the floor of it is deep in curled and fragrant shavings that the children carry off by the armful for the fire. The leather worker, with his hides and his awls, making the sandals and the straps and the water skins and the harness. The reed worker, weaving the mats and the baskets and the light swift river boats from the papyrus and the rushes. The weaver at the loom, the maker of ropes. Each has his corner and his skill and his small honoured place, and the village clothes and shods and furnishes and floats itself, very largely, from the work of its own patient hands. There is no hurry in any of it, and no machine, and nothing that a man's hands and his few good tools and his whole life's practice cannot do. The potter's wheel turns because a boy turns it. The saw bites because an arm draws it. The thread runs because a foot treads and a hand throws, over and over, in the old unbroken rhythm. And the children drift from doorway to doorway through the long afternoon, watching the mud become a jar and the wood become a chair and the reeds become a boat, learning the crafts of the world simply by standing quietly and watching them done, as children have learned them since the beginning. Until one day, without ever quite deciding to, they find their own hands know the way of it too. Of all the callings along the water, none belongs to the river so wholly as the fisherman's. For while the farmer only borrows the river's water and leads it to his fields, the fisherman goes out onto the river itself and takes his living from its very body, and knows its moods and its shallows and its deep green places, as a man knows the rooms of his own house. He goes out in the cool of the morning or the gold of the evening, on a light boat of bundled papyrus that he has made himself, that sits low and neat on the water and can be carried on one shoulder up the bank at day's end. He poles it out from the reeds with a long staff, standing, balanced, reading the water, and then he sets to the patient work of the catch. He casts his net, the fine meshed net weighted with little stones at its edge, out over the still water in a wide bellying arc, and lets it sink, and draws it slowly, gently in, and lifts it, dripping and silver flashing and alive. the fish twisting and gleaming in the mesh, and shakes them out into the wet bottom of the boat, where they leap and settle and are still. Or he sets his long fish traps of woven reed in the narrow channels and comes back at dawn to find them heavy. Or he stands in the shallows with a spear, motionless, a heron in the shape of a man, and strikes, once, when the moment is right. The river is generous to him, for it teems, in this age, with a richness no later river will hold. And a patient man with a good net will not go home empty. There are the great fish of the deep channel and the small bright fish of the shallows, and the perch and the catfish and the mullet, and the fisherman knows them all, where each lies and when it feeds and how it fights. And he carries this knowing not as learning but as a part of himself, the way he carries the calluses on his hands. His catch is the household's meat, far more often than the beast is, split and salted and hung to dry in the sun until it is hard and keeps for months, or eaten fresh and grilled over the coals with a little oil, the plain good taste of the river on the tongue. It is a life lived at the water's edge, between the reeds and the open stream, wet and simple and old. And it has its dangers, for the river is not only fish. There are the great beasts in it, the river horse that can crush a reed boat with a snap of its vast jaws, and is given a wide and respectful berth. And worse, the long armoured shape of the crocodile lying still as a drifting log in the shallows. And every fisherman knows the stories and watches the water with a wariness that never quite sleeps, and speaks the old words to the old gods of the river before he pushes off. But mostly it is quiet, and mostly it is peaceful. The low light on the water and the reeds whispering, and the net going out and coming in. And at the end of the day he poles his boat back to the bank in the last of the gold. The day's catch silver in the bottom of it, and shoulders the light craft, and climbs the bank toward the wood smoke and the waiting supper. Wet to the waist and content. Above the world of the field and the river and the workshop, thin and cool and unhurried, moves another world, the world of the written word, and though the farmer rarely touches it, it touches him at the corners of his year, in the person of the scribe. For everything in this ordered country is counted and written and remembered on the page. The scribe is the man who can do this, and it sets him apart and above, and he knows it and is not sorry. He has spent the years of his boyhood that other boys spent in the fields, sitting cross-legged in the temple school instead, copying the signs over and over onto potsherds and smoothed boards, aching and drilled and beaten to it, learning the hundreds of little pictures that stand for things and sounds, until at last the whole beautiful, difficult system lived in his hand, and he could take up the reed pen and the cake of ink and set down in the neat flowing script of daily use whatever needed to be set down, and a great deal needs to be set down. He sits with his scribe's palette across his knees and his roll of pale papyrus or his ready sheet, and he writes the tally of the harvest, the count of the cattle, the measure of the grain that goes to the granary, and the share that goes to the temple, and the tax that goes to the distant king, the letters between officials, the records of the courts, the contracts and the accounts, and the endless patient bookkeeping of a kingdom that runs, in the end, on ink. To the farmer, the scribe appears at the turns of the year like the weather, and is about as arguable with. He comes at harvest with his assistants and his measuring rope and his pallet, and he walks the field and reckons its size and estimates its yield and writes it down, and from what he writes will come the share that the household must render up, and there is no hiding a field from the scribe and no arguing with the figure once the reed has moved. He is not cruel, usually, and not kind either, but simply exact. a man doing a clean, cool job with clean, cool hands, and the farmer stands by in the dust with his own rough hands hanging and watches his year assessed in a script he cannot read and says little, for it is the way of things and has always been, and the grain that goes must go. And behind the scribe, vast and quiet and everywhere, stands the temple, the great house of the god that rises white-walled and enormous at the heart of the district, its pylons and pillars dwarfing everything the village has ever built, its inner rooms cool and dark and forbidden, where the priests tend the god in his shrine through the unseen offices of the day. The temple is landlord and granary and court and centre all at once, owning the fields, storing the grain, employing half the craftsmen of the district, reaching its long, patient hand into every household's year. The farmer may never pass its inner gate and may see the god himself only once or twice a lifetime, when the great image is carried out in its golden boat at the festival, veiled, blazing, borne on the shoulders of the priests through the roaring crowd. But he lives, all the same, in the temple's long shadow, and works in the end a portion of his life for it, and finds in that not resentment, mostly, but a kind of order, a great fixed frame around the small warm picture of his days, and sleeps the sounder for knowing exactly where, in the vast and settled scheme of things, he and his little field belong. Away from the fields, where the land lies lowest and the river spreads and slows, lie the marshes, the great green wildernesses of papyrus, and they are a world apart, half water and half land and wholly alive, and the village goes into them for 100 things and comes out of them refreshed. The papyrus grows here in vast, dense thickets, taller than a man on his boat, taller than 3 men, its long green stems rising smooth and cool from the black water to burst at the top into soft feathery crowns that hiss and nod in the least breath of wind, mile upon mile of it, a swaying green forest with no floor. And it is one of the great gifts of this country, for from the papyrus comes nearly everything. The light boats that carry the fowler and the fisherman, the mats that floor the house, the baskets and the ropes and the sandals, and above all the smooth, pale sheets, beaten and pressed and dried, on which the scribe writes the memory of the whole kingdom. A man poles his little boat in among the green stems and cuts the papyrus in armfuls and brings it out. And half the working stuff of the village comes, in the end, out of the marsh. And the marsh is thick with birds, past all counting, and the fowling is one of the small, glad adventures of the year. In the reedy shallows and the open lagoons live the ducks and the geese in their thousands, and the herons and the ibis, the pelicans and the cranes, and the little bright singing things in the reeds. And clouds of them rise at evening in a beating thunder of wings that darkens the low sun. The fowler goes in among them on his silent boat, gliding, still, and takes them with his throwing stick that spins and drops a bird from the air, or with the great clap net spread across the water that a crew of men snap shut on a whole feeding flock at once. It is work, for the birds are food, salted and dried and stored, or fattened in the yard. But it is also, plainly, a pleasure. The going out into the green quiet, the gliding among the reeds, the tense still waiting, and the sudden burst. And a man comes home from the marsh with his catch and his cut papyrus and something else besides, a lightness, a morning spent in the loveliest and wildest place he knows. For the marsh is beautiful, and even the plainest fowler feels it, though he would not say so. The light comes green, and broken down through the papyrus. The water is black and still and dense with the shapes of fish. Lotus flowers, blue and white, lie open on the surface in the morning and close again at dusk, and their scent hangs sweet and cool over the water. And a man will lean from his boat and pick one and carry it home to his wife, or tuck it behind his own ear for no reason he could name. Dragonflies stitch the air. A kingfisher drops like a thrown jewel and rises with a silver fish. And deep in the green, unseen, the wilder things move, the things a man keeps clear of, so that the marsh is edged, always with a little thrill of the unknown, a green paradise, with something older sleeping at its heart, and the fowler takes his boat home before the dark comes down, and is glad, once he is out again on the open, shining river, to see the smoke of the village rising ahead. The whole life of this country is a conversation with water, the leading and holding and sharing of it, and the great work that keeps the conversation going is the work of the canals, and it belongs not to one man but to all of them together. For the river's yearly gift, the flood, is generous but blind. It comes up over the land wherever the land lies low and runs off wherever it lies high, and left to itself it would water some fields to drowning and leave others dry a stone's throw away. So the people, over uncounted generations, have taught the water where to go. They have raised the long, low dikes that hold the flood on the fields in great still basins until the soil has drunk its fill. They have dug the canals that lead the water back among the higher ground, and the smaller channels that branch from them, and the smaller ones again, a whole patient tree of waterways, spreading the one great gift out evenly across the many small needs. It is the labour of the whole community, this network, and it is never finished, for every flood chokes the channels with fresh silt and breaks the banks in places, and every year, in the season for it, the men go out together to clear and mend and dig, shoulder to shoulder in the mud. The whole village at one great task, and the sharing of the water is the sharing of life itself, and so it is watched and reckoned and gently governed. The channels run past many fields, and the water in them is finite, and a man who took more than his share, who breached the bank early and drank the flow dry before it reached his neighbour, would be doing a thing the village could not forgive. So there is a keeping of turns, an old understood order of who opens which gate and when, overseen by the headman and the elders and, at the greater level, by the officials and the ever-counting scribes, and disputes are brought and settled, and the water goes round, more or less fairly, more or less peacefully, field by field, turn by turn, down the long green land. There is a deep wisdom in it, though no one calls it that. The wisdom of people who learned, before history began, that water is life, and that life shared carefully outlasts life seized. A man cannot flood his field alone. He needs the dike his grandfather helped to raise, and the canal his neighbours helped to dig, and the turn that the whole village keeps. He is bound to them by the water as surely as by blood, and he knows it, and it steadies him, this being needed and this needing, this quiet daily proof that he belongs to something larger than his own small strip of black earth. The channel runs past his field, bright and cool and shared, carrying the river's gift to him, and on past him to the next man and the next, and he opens his little gate at his own appointed hour, and takes his measure, and closes it again, and lets the water run on, as it has run for 1,000 years, down the patient veins of the green and watered land. Of all the slow crafts that fill the women's hours between the great labours of the fire and the field, none runs longer or lies closer to the skin than the making of linen, for it clothes them all, from the newborn to the dead, and it begins in a blue-flowered field and ends, months later, as the soft pale cloth folded in the chest against the wall. The flax is grown like any crop, sown in the cool season and watered and tended, and for a few weeks the fields of it stand hazed with small blue flowers, lovely and short-lived, the loveliest thing the working land puts on all year. Then it is not cut but pulled, whole, up by the roots, for the long unbroken fibre is the treasure, and no blade must shorten it. And the pulled stalks are dried and combed to free the seed, and then laid in water to rot away the soft green stuff and free the long tough threads inside, and beaten and combed again and again, hank after hank, until what began as a fistful of woody stalks has become a shining fall of pale fibre, fine and strong and ready for the thread. And then the spinning, the endless patient spinning, the work that is never quite done in any house and never needs to be hurried. The woman draws the fibre from the distaff and twists it with wet fingers and sets the spindle turning and dropping, and the thread gathers on it slow and fine and even, and she does this standing in the doorway, watching the lane, and sitting by the fire in the evening, and waiting for the pot, and talking to her neighbour over the wall, so that the spindle turns through the whole fabric of her days, and the thread it makes is quite literally spun out of her ordinary hours. And the woven cloth comes off the loom in lengths of pale linen, coarse for the working clothes and the sacking, fine and finer for the good garments, finest of all, sheer almost as mist, for the great and the priests and the gods, cloth so fine that a whole robe of it might be drawn through a ring. It is the plainest and most intimate of the crafts, this turning of a blue field into the cloth against the skin. And the women hold the whole of it in their hands. Every step, from the pulled stalk to the folded robe. The linen wraps the baby at its birth, and the bride at her wedding, and the old one at the last, and lies cool against the body through the long, hot days, and is washed white at the river, and spread on the warm bank in the sun, and mended, and handed down, and worn soft and thin with the years. There is no thread of the household's life, quite literally, that does not pass through the women's turning fingers. And the low whir of the dropping spindle is one of the oldest and most constant sounds of the house. There, under everything, patient as the river, spinning the days themselves into something that can be worn. There is no coin in this country, not yet. No little discs of stamped metal passing hand to hand, and yet trade goes on, brisk and daily and shrewd, for a household never makes quite everything it needs, nor uses quite everything it makes. And so, at the landing place by the river where the boats put in, there is a market. And market days have a bright and different feeling, all their own. Everything here is barter, the direct and ancient swapping of a thing for a thing. And it is done by eye and by long custom and by a shared unspoken sense of what a thing is worth, measured against the great steady standards that everyone carries in the head. So many measures of grain, so much copper by weight, a jar of oil, a length of linen. A woman brings her spun thread, or her garden surplus, her onions and her dried fish, and her basket of dates, and lays them out on a mat. And a man brings the sandals he has made, or the pots he has fired, or the fish he has caught that dawn, and they fall to it, weighing and comparing and haggling with great enjoyment and no hurry at all. A duck against a fan of reeds, a pot of honey against a pair of sandals, a measure of grain against a fine bone needle, until both are satisfied, or satisfied enough, and the goods change hands, and the deal is sealed with a nod and a word, and both walk off privately, certain they had the better of it. The landing place is the liveliest spot in the district on such a morning, loud and close and full of smells. The boats lie drawn up on the mud, the broad, slow cargo boats down from the south and up from the north, and their crews unload the things the village cannot make or grow, the good timber and the fine pottery, the stone for the grinding, the copper, the little luxuries that come from far away and set the women murmuring. A string of bright beads, a pot of scented fat, a scrap of something rare. The air is thick with fish and bread and beer and dust and the river, and thick, too, with talk. For the market is the district's meeting place and news exchange as much as its shop, and the real business of the morning is as much in the gossip traded over the goods as in the goods themselves. And then, by the heat of midday, it is done, and the mats are rolled and the boats push off, and the crowd thins away up the lanes toward the shade and the noon rest, each household carrying home the day's small gains, the thing swapped for the thing, the little surplus turned into the little need. There is a satisfaction in it beyond the goods, the satisfaction of the fair exchange freely made, of having gone out among the neighbours and dealt and talked and come home the richer by a pot or a fish or a length of cloth and a whole morning's worth of the village news. And the river, which brought the boats and will carry them on again, slides past the emptying landing place, patient and enormous, the great road that ties the whole long country together, down which everything comes and along which everything goes, market by market, landing by landing, the length of the watered land. The great gods of this country are very great indeed, remote and blazing, tended in the dark hearts of the vast temples by the shaven priests, carried out veiled and golden only at the festivals. But the farmer's own gods, the ones that walk with him through the ordinary day, are smaller and nearer and dearer, and there is no hour and no corner of the house they do not gently fill. For this is a world thick with the unseen, and the man in the field feels it around him as plainly as he feels the sun. The river itself is a god, generous and moody, to be thanked at its rising, and coaxed with a word and a small offering. The sun that crosses the sky each day is the greatest of the visible powers, dying each dusk in the west and born again each dawn, and its faithful daily return is the plainest of all the promises the man lives by. The very soil, the grain, the flood, the harvest, each is watched over by its own power, and the round of the year is also a round of the gods, each season laid in the hands of the one who keeps it. But it is in the small things that the gods come closest. In the niche in the house wall stands the household's own dear protector, the little bandy-legged dwarf god with his lion's mane and his cheerful ugly face, the friend of the family and the guardian of the sleeping house, who frightens off the demons of the night and the dangers of childbirth and watches over the little children, and before whom the wife sets each day her crumb and her drop and her murmured word. Near him, perhaps, the kindly hippopotamus goddess who guards the mother and the newborn. On the woman's arm and the child's neck hang the little amulets, the carved eye that wards off harm, the pillar that means endurance, the beetle that means the new-made morning, small and worn and constantly touched. A charm is spoken over a fevered child, a knot is tied, an old word is said against the scorpion and the snake. Det är promoted news. There is nothing grand in this daily faith, and nothing cold. It is not the vast theology of the temple, but the warm, close piety of people who live among powers they cannot see and choose, on the whole, to trust them. The man greets the sun, the woman feeds the little god, the child wears its charm. The dead are remembered with a loaf and a jar set out at the proper times, for they too are near, the grandfathers and grandmothers gone before, not vanished, but only moved a little way off, into the west, into the quiet, and still to be spoken to, and still, in their way, watching over the house. And all of it, the great gods and the small, the river and the sun, and the dwarf in his niche and the ancestors in the west, makes a single seamless world in which the farmer is never quite alone, never quite unheld, but moves through his ordinary day inside a great warm web of the watching unseen, and lies down at night and says his word to the little god in the wall, and sleeps without fear. The year here has 3 seasons, and they are not the seasons of any other land, for they are not made by the tilting sun, but by the river, and the first and greatest of them is Akhet, the inundation, the coming of the flood, and the whole life of the country turns upon it as a door turns upon its hinge. Through the burning weeks of high summer, the river has run low, shrunk into its channel, the fields cracked and dusty at their edges, the whole land waiting, watching the water, for everything depends now upon what the river will do. And then, far off and unseen, in lands the farmer has never heard of, the great rains fall and the water begins to rise. It shows first as a changing of the colour, the clear green river turning slowly turbid and brown, then reddish, heavy with the rich, far-carried mud. And then the level begins to climb, day by day, up the marks on the bank, up past the landing stones, and a kind of held breath goes through the whole country. For this is the moment the year has waited for, and everything hangs on its measure. Too small a flood, and the high fields go dry, and there is hunger. Too great a flood, and the dikes are overwhelmed, and the villages themselves stand in danger. But a good flood, a right and generous flood, is the plain foundation of the whole good year. And the watching of it is watched by everyone, from the farmer at his bank to the priests reading the gauges to the distant king himself. And when it comes right, it is a wonder to see. The river swells and brims and at last comes up over its banks, gently, and spreads out across the lowland. And the fields the man ploughed and sowed and tended vanish, one by one, under the sliding brown water, until the whole valley, from desert edge to desert edge, is a vast, still sheet of shining water. And the villages stand up out of it, on their mounds, like little islands, joined by the raised causeways, and a man may take his boat where he walked a month before, and paddle over his own drowned fields and see the tops of the dikes like lines drawn on the water. It is not a disaster, this drowning, but the very opposite, the thing most longed for. For the water lies on the land for weeks, warm and patient and deep, soaking the soil and laying down over everything its precious new skin of black mud. And the man, watching his fields disappear, watches with a full and easy heart. For he knows that when the water draws back, it will leave the ground richer than before, made new, made ready for nothing out of the river's own body. And so Akhet is, strangely, the season of rest, the great pause in the working year. For there is no field work to be done when the fields are under water. The farmer mends his tools and his house and his boat and takes his ease in the shade. And the whole country turns to other labours, for these are the weeks when the freed hands of the villages are gathered in their thousands to the king's great works, the building of the temples and the tombs and the monuments that will outlast everything, hauling the vast stones in the cool of the standing water. But for many it is simply the quiet time, the flood time, the weeks of watching the water and waiting for it to turn. And there is a deep, old restfulness in it, in the enforced stillness, in the sight of the shining, drowned land, in the knowledge that the great machine of the year is turning exactly as it should, that the river has come again as it always comes, and that the good black earth beneath the water is being made ready, silently, for the sowing that will follow when the flood goes down. When at last the flood has lain its weeks upon the land and done its patient work, the river begins as slowly as it rose to draw back. And the second season comes, Peret, the going down, the emergence, the season of the growing things, and with it the land wakes to its greatest and gladdest labour. The water sinks away by inches, day by day, back down the marks on the bank and back into its channel. And the drowned fields rise up again out of the falling water, one by one, transfigured. Where there was cracked dust, there is now a wide, black, glistening plain of new mud, soft and moist and deep and rich beyond the deserving of any farmer in a harder country, laid down fresh and free by the river over the whole tired land. The man walks out onto his reborn field and takes up a handful of the dark, wet earth and lets it fall, and there is no gladder moment in his whole year, for the ground is made new and made ready, and asks now only to be opened and sown. And the sowing is quick and easy and joyful, for the soft flood soil needs no breaking. Sometimes the seed is simply cast broadcast onto the wet mud and the beasts driven across to tread it in, the sheep and the pigs and the goats trampling the grain down into the willing earth with their small, sharp feet, a scene as old as farming itself and full of a rough good humour, the shouting and the trotting beasts and the flying seed. And sometimes the light plough is drawn across first, the simple wooden plough that the ox pulls and the man leans on, opening the soft earth in shallow furrows for the seed to fall into, hardly work at all in ground so willing. The emmer wheat and the barley go in, and the flax, and in the garden plots the beans and the onions and the greens, and within days, in the warmth and the wet and the richness, the first green haze of the sprouting grain lies over the black fields like a breath, and thickens and rises, and the whole valley turns week by week from black to tender green. And then the growing months, the good, quiet months of Peret, the pleasantest of the whole year, when the sun is kind and the fields are green, and the great work is the gentle work of the water, the leading and tending and guarding of the growing crop. The man walks his green rows in the mild mornings and leads the channel water to their roots, and keeps the birds off the ripening grain, and watches, with the deep, slow satisfaction of his kind, the thing he sowed stand up and thicken and turn from green toward gold. The cattle grow fat on the new grass. The garden gives its daily armfuls. The days are warm and long and full of a plain contentment. The contentment of a man watching his year come right. And the harvest, still weeks away, stands promised in every green and thickening field. And the whole land lies easy in the middle of its year, green and watered and growing, between the flood that made it and the harvest that will crown it. And then the green turns to gold, and the third season comes, Shemu, the season of harvest, the crown and the reckoning of the whole year's round, and the village goes out together into the ripe fields to gather what the flood gave and the sun ripened and the water kept alive. The grain stands ready when it stands golden, heavy-headed, whispering dry in the warm wind, and every man reads that readiness at a glance and knows the morning has come. And on that morning the whole village goes out, every hand that can hold a sickle or carry a sheaf, the men and the women and the half-grown children in the cool before the heat, and the great work begins. The reapers move down the field in a long line, and they do not cut the grain low as later ages will, but take it high, gripping a fistful of the golden stalks, and sweeping the short curved sickle through just below the ears so that only the heads and a hand's length of straw come away, and the tall stubble is left standing for the beasts to graze and the flood to rot down. It is bent and rhythmic and endless work. The sickle hissing, the cut grain laid in armfuls, the line of workers creeping down the shining field under the climbing sun, and it lasts from light to light through all the golden weeks of the harvest. Behind the reapers come the gatherers, binding the cut grain into sheaves or heaping it into the wide baskets and the nets, and behind them the donkeys and the little sledges carrying the harvest off the field to the threshing floor, load after swaying load, and behind them, last of all, the gleaners, the old women and the smallest children, working slowly along the shorn ground, gathering the dropped and scattered ears one by one into their aprons. For nothing here is wasted, nothing at all, and the grain that falls belongs by ancient kindness to those who stoop for it. And over all of it moves the shadow of the scribe with his measuring rope and his reed pen, walking the fields, reckoning the yield, writing down what the household must render, so that even in the gladness of the gathering the reckoning is never quite absent, the taking of the share that keeps the temple and the granary and the distant crown. But the gladness is real for all that, gladder here than in any harder land. For the fields of this country give with a generosity that still, every year, feels like a gift freely made. The barns will be full, the bread of the coming year stands drying in the sun, sheaf on sheaf, more of it with every hour, and everyone can see it and count it, and the deep relief of it lies over the whole hot, dusty, aching labour like a blessing. There is beer carried out to the field in the afternoons, and singing, sometimes, along the line of the reapers, the old harvest songs, and a rough, tired good humour in the shade at the noon rest, and the plain animal satisfaction of a great thing being accomplished together by the whole village, with its own hands, in the golden weeks that will be remembered and spoken of long after, when the fields lie under the flood again and the year has come round once more to its waiting. The cut grain is not yet bread, nor even yet grain a man can store. And so, from the golden fields it comes to the threshing floor, the wide beaten circle of hard earth at the edge of the village. And here the second half of the harvest labour goes on, dusty and golden and loud, through all the long afternoons of Shemu. The sheaves are spread out thick upon the floor, and the oxen are brought, and driven round and round upon them, a patient plodding circle of great mild beasts, their hard hooves treading the grain free of the ears and breaking up the straw, round and round in the beating sun, while a boy walks behind them with a switch and a song, and the golden dust rises in a haze over the whole floor and hangs there, glittering in the low light. It is old and simple and effective, this treading out, and the beasts do not mind it. And the boy rides one of them sometimes when no one is looking, and the grain and the chaff and the broken straw pile up together underfoot, threshed and ready for the next great labour, which is the parting of the grain from the chaff, the winnowing. And the winnowing waits upon the wind. And so it is done in the cool of the evening, when the breeze comes up off the river, and it is the loveliest work of the whole harvest to watch. The men take up the threshed heap on their broad wooden scoops, two little curved boards, and toss it high into the air, up into the moving evening air, and the wind does the rest. The heavy grain falls straight back down onto the floor in a golden rain, and the light chaff and dust and broken straw are carried off sideways on the breeze, drifting away in a pale cloud, so that with every throw the pile at the men's feet grows cleaner and yellower and more purely grain, and the air all about the threshing floor fills with the drifting gold, and the low sun lights it. And the whole scene, the tossing men and the falling grain and the drifting chaff and the slow-turning oxen, glows and shimmers in the evening light like something out of a dream of plenty. And then the clean grain is measured, carefully, under the eye of the scribe, into the great baskets, and carried at last to the granary, the tall beehive-domed bins of mud brick that stand in the yard, and poured in through the opening at the top, to be drawn out as needed through the little door at the foot. And there it will keep, cool and dry and dark, the whole year's bread and beer stored up against the coming months, against the flood time when nothing grows, against the lean seasons and the bad years. The household's whole security sealed away in the round mud bins. And the man stands in his yard in the last light and looks at his full granary with the deepest and simplest satisfaction his year affords. For the wager is won, the labour is crowned, the bread is safe, and whatever the river does next season, this year, at least, the household will eat. And he has earned that certainty with his own two hands. And he sleeps that night, the sound, deep sleep of the harvest done. The year is not only work and rest and the turning of the river, it is also, at its appointed times, joy, sudden and public and shared. For scattered through the calendar like bright stones are the festivals, the days of the gods, and there is nothing else in the whole round of the year quite like them. For most of the year the great god of the district lies hidden, deep in the dark heart of the temple, tended by the shaven priests in the secret daily offices that no ordinary person ever sees, behind wall within wall within wall. But on the festival days the god comes out. The great image, veiled and blazing with gold, is lifted in its sacred boat onto the shoulders of the priests, and carried in slow procession out through the vast pylons and along the processional way, out at last into the light and the sight of the whole gathered people, and the district goes wild, with a joy that has waited all year for exactly this. The crowd packs the way, deep and roaring. Everyone who can walk, the farmers and the craftsmen and the women with their children on their shoulders, jostling and shouting and weeping and reaching, straining for a sight of the golden boat swaying above the heads of the priests. And the incense rolls out in blue clouds, and the sistrums rattle, and the drums beat, and the singers chant, and the whole roaring river of humanity moves with the god along the way. And it is a holiday, the truest holiday of the year, for on the festival days no work is done, and the temple, out of its great stores, feeds the people, and there is bread and roast meat, and, above all, beer. Beer flowing free and generous as it never flows in the ordinary year, so that the solemn joy of the procession loosens as the day goes on into a broader and warmer and less solemn joy entirely. And the whole district feasts and sings and dances in the streets and the temple forecourts, and old quarrels are drowned and old friendships watered, and young people meet each other's eyes across the crowd, and the ordinary, careful, measured life of the village dissolves, for one bright day, into pure shared abundance and delight. There are the great festivals and the small ones, the ones that fill the whole district and the ones kept only in the village, the God's days and the flood's day and the harvest's feast and the turning points of the sacred year, and they are scattered through the calendar so that there is always one behind, just fading in the memory, and always one ahead to look toward, however long the working weeks between. And they are not stolen from the year's labour, but woven into it, the rest and the joy folded into the toil by a rhythm older than anyone, trusted by everyone, so that a man carries his whole hard year more lightly for knowing that the god will come out again, and the beer will flow again, and the whole village will dance again in the torchlit dark, at the appointed time, as it always has, as it always will. In every house, on the bench by the wall or the mat in the shaded corner, sit the old ones, the grandmothers and the grandfathers whose working days are behind them, and they are not set aside but kept close, at the warm centre of the household, honoured and needed and never ever idle. For a long life here ends not in emptiness but in a gentle and useful ease. Their heavy labour is done, and no one asks it of them, but their hands are never quite still, for there is always the sitting down work of the house, and it drifts naturally to them, the shelling of the beans, the twisting of the palm fibre into rope, the mending, the minding of the smallest children, the endless patient spinning that the grandmother does without even looking, her fingers moving through the wool by a memory older than thought. They keep the fire, they watch the pot, they sit in the doorway in the cool of the day and take in the whole slow passing life of the lane, and greet the neighbours and dandle the babies, and are, in 100 small, unhurried ways, the steady hands at the quiet centre of the turning house. And they are the village's memory, its long unwritten book. They remember the great flood that came over the causeways, and the low flood of the hungry year, which they speak of rarely and touch wood when they do. They remember who married whom 2 generations back, and whose grandfather quarrelled with whose over a boundary stone still disputed, and the old ways of doing things, the right words for the charms and the old songs for the harvest and the proper offerings for the dead. Ask them anything, and they were there, or their mothers were, and it comes back through them, the whole long memory of the village, handed down not in writing but in talk, from the old mouth to the young ear in the warm evenings by the fire. For the evenings are their season above all, and the stories are their gift. When the meal is done and the dark has come down and the family gathers into the small circle of the firelight, It is the grandmother who opens the great store behind her eyes, and the children fall silent and press close, and the tales come out, the old ones, told 100 times and loved the more for it. The tales of the gods and their wonders, of the clever younger son and the talking beast and the treasure and the trick, of the ghost on the desert road and the kindness repaid 100-fold, half wonder and half warning, the whole inherited dreaming of the people passed down in the firelight from the old to the young as it has been passed since before there was writing to fix it. The fire cracks and settles. The children's eyes are huge in the low light, and the grandmother's voice goes on, unhurried, weaving the old worlds in the dark, until the smallest ones are asleep where they sit and are carried gently to bed, still half inside the story. Sickness comes to every house in its turn. The fever and the flux, the hurt from the field, the child that will not thrive, the old one whose breath grows short. And when it comes, the village meets it, as it meets everything, with a patient mixture of the practical and the sacred, of the herb and the spoken word. For here the two are not divided, but woven into one. There are those in the district skilled in the healing arts, and they are honoured, for their craft is old and written and real. Much of what they know is the plain wisdom of the body and the plant, gathered and tested over uncounted generations and set down carefully in the scrolls. The herbs that cool a fever and the ones that settle a griping gut, the honey laid on a wound that keeps it clean and sweet, the willow for the ache, the castor oil and the coriander, and the cumin and the figs. The binding of the broken bone in stiffened linen, the careful watching of the pulse beneath the skin, which they call the speaking of the heart. A great deal of it works, or works well enough. And the healer who comes to the sickbed with his bag of remedies and his quiet, competent hands is a comfort as real as any in the village, and woven all through it, inseparable from it, is the other medicine, the medicine of the word and the charm. For sickness here is not only a thing of the body, but a thing of the unseen, a demon slipped in, an angry spirit, the evil eye of a jealous neighbour, and it must be driven out as much as it is soothed. So the remedy is given with a spell spoken over it, the old words of power that name the sickness and command it out. And the amulet is tied on, the little carved eye, the knot, the figure of the protecting God. And the mother whispers the charm over her feverish child in the dark, the same words her mother whispered over her. There is no contradiction in it, to them. The herb and the word are two hands of the one healing, and both are needed, and both are given, and the sick are tended with the whole of the village's care, body and spirit together. And when the healing does not come, when the fever climbs past the herbs and the words, the household gathers close, and does not send the dying one away, but keeps the failing grandfather or the sinking child in the warm centre of the house, tended and touched and spoken to until the end. For death here is not a horror to be hidden, but a passage to be eased, a going away only a little way, into the west, into the quiet, where the ancestors already are. The family will grieve, and grieve deeply, but not without hope. for they believe the one who goes is not lost, but only gone ahead, and will be remembered with the loaf and the jar set out at the proper times, and spoken to still and met again, one day, in the green fields beyond the west. And so even sickness and death are folded in the end into the same great warm order that holds the whole of their lives, and the household tends its sick and mourns its dead and goes on, held, as it is held in everything, by the gods and the ancestors and the deep old certainty that all of it, somehow, is as it should be. At the very edge of the green, where the last watered field gives way, there is a line, and beyond the line the red land begins, the desert, the Deshret, and it lies along the whole length of the world, close enough to walk to, and it is the great and silent other half of everything the people know. It could not be more different from the black land it borders. Where the fields are dark and moist and crowded with life, the desert is pale and dry and empty, a country of sand and stone and shimmering heat, where nothing grows and no water runs, and the silence lies as heavy as the sun. A man may stand with one foot on the black soil, soft and cool and teeming, and the other on the red sand, and feel in that single stride the whole plain division of his world into the living and the not living, the gift and the waste. And he does not often cross the line without reason, for the desert is no place for a farmer, and he leaves it mostly to the wind and the sun and the wandering herdsmen and the caravans that come in from far away. And yet the red land is not only emptiness and threat, for it holds, along its edge, the resting places of the dead. And so the living turn toward it, at the last, with a kind of tenderness. It is out there, in the dry cliffs and the desert margin beyond the reach of the flood, that the people lay their dead. For the black land is too precious to spare and too wet to keep them. But the red land is dry and still and everlasting, and its very dryness is a kindness, keeping what is laid in it against the long years. So the necropolis stands at the desert's edge above the green, the graves of the ordinary folk cut simply into the sand and the rock, the greater tombs of the great rising more grandly nearby, and the whole line of it looks down over the living valley, over the fields and the river and the smoke of the villages, quiet, patient, waiting, the place where every road, in the end, gently turns. There is no horror in this nearness of the dead, only a kind of company. The people go out to the graves at the festival times with their bread and their beer and their flowers, and sit by them and eat there, and talk to the ones gone ahead as easily as they talk to the neighbour over the wall, and come back down into the green refreshed. For the dead are not far, only a little way off, out there in the quiet red land, watching over the valley they loved. And in the evening, when the sun goes down, it goes down over the desert, over the western cliffs, into the land of the dead, dying there each dusk as every living thing must die, and rising again each dawn in the east. And the man in his field watches it go with an easy heart, for it has taught him the plainest lesson of his faith, that the going down is not an ending but a passage, and that beyond the red land and the western dark there is, always, another morning. The village is a small and complete world, and a man may live his whole life within a morning's walk of the house he was born in and never feel the smallness of it. And yet his little world is a bead on a very long thread, for the river ties the whole vast country together, north and south, from the far cataracts to the wide green delta and the sea. And down that great water road the wider land is always, faintly, present. For the river is the one great highway, and it is a highway that runs both ways, for nothing, which is the wonder of it. The current carries a boat northward, down toward the sea, without a stroke of the oar. And the wind, which blows almost always from the north, fills a sail and carries a boat southward up against the current, so that a man may go down with the water and come back up with the wind. And the whole country is stitched together effortlessly by this happy marriage of the stream and the breeze. And so the boats are always passing, and the man in his field by the bank looks up from his work a dozen times a day to watch them go. The little reed skiffs of the fishermen, the ferries crossing from bank to bank, and the great cargo boats, broad and heavy and slow, riding low under their loads. And it is a wonder to a village child to think of all the things those boats carry and all the far places they have seen. Down from the deep south come the goods of hotter lands, the gold and the ebony and the ivory, the leopard skins and the ostrich feathers, the incense for the temples, borne up the river past the roaring cataracts on the long, slow voyage north. Down the river, too, comes the good stone, the granite and the fine limestone floated on great barges from the quarries to the building places of the gods and kings. And along it all move the officials and the soldiers and the messengers of the crown, and the tax grain going to the royal granaries, and the letters and the news, so that even the farmer in his small green corner is bound by the passing boat into the great single-ordered body of the whole long land, ruled from far away by a king he will never see, in a city he will never visit, and yet whose distant ordering reaches through the scribe and the tax and the passing boat, right down to the edge of his own field. He does not resent it, mostly, and does not much think of it, for the wider land is like the weather of another country, real enough but far off, and the doings of the great sound to him like distant thunder over the desert, grand and rumbling and no concern of his. His concern is the water in the channel and the grain in the field and the beast in the byre. But sometimes, of an evening, standing at the bank as a great boat goes by, all golden in the low sun, its sail full and its deck piled with the goods of unimaginable places, bound for cities whose names are half a legend, he feels the pull of the wider world for a moment, the vastness of it beyond his green horizon. And then the boat slides on around the bend, and the wake smooths away, and the smoke of his own supper rises behind him, and he turns back to the small, warm, sufficient world that is his, and is glad of it, and goes in. The heat breaks slowly in the long slant of the afternoon, and the light begins to change, and everything the fierce noon had bleached and flattened comes softly back to itself, and the loveliest hours of the whole day arrive, quietly, over the river. The sun, which stood so white and hard at noon, sinks toward the western cliffs and grows large and gold and gentle, and lays its long, broadening road of light straight down the water, and the whole river turns from glare to glow. The colours come back into the land, the deep green of the fields and the gold of the ripe grain and the warm brown of the mud walls, all of it richer now and softer in the honeyed light. The men come up from the fields with their tools on their shoulders, walking the raised paths between the darkening plots, and the boats come in to the landing, and the fishermen pole home with the day's catch silver in the bottom of the reed skiffs. And everything, everyone, turns, in the cooling gold, toward home. And the birds come back to the river as they left it in the morning, in their thousands, the great slow flapping ranks of them crossing the reddening sky toward their roosts in the marshes, the herons and the ibis and the ducks in their long wavering lines, calling as they go, and the low sun catches their wings, The cattle are watered at the river's edge, sucking up their great patient draughts while the boys lean on the bank and talk. The air fills with the evening sounds and the evening smells, the smoke of the cooking fires rising blue and straight from every roof, the smell of baking bread and the pot on the coals, the low voices carrying far over the still water. A child called home, a snatch of song, the creak of a shadoof, somewhere still lifting the last water of the day. It is the hour of ease, this long golden evening, the reward at the end of the labour, and the whole village feels it and gives itself to it. The work is done, or nearly, and the heat is gone, and the light is kind. And there is a little time now before the dark that belongs to no task at all. Men stand talking at the field gates longer than they need to. Women sit spinning in the doorways in the last of the light. The old ones are on their bench by the wall, watching the river take the colours of the sky. And over it all the sun sinks lower and larger and redder, toward the desert and the western cliffs and the land of the dead, and lays its last long light across the valley. And the river holds it and gives it back, a road of dimming gold, running away north into the gathering blue, until at last the great disk touches the cliffs and sinks and is gone. And the first cool breath of the night comes down off the desert and moves along the darkening water. With the sun down and the quick dusk gathering, the household draws itself in from the scattered work of the day and gathers at last around the one warm centre it started from before the dawn, the hearth, the fire, the evening meal, and this drawing in is the sweetest small ritual of the whole day. The man comes in through the low doorway out of the blue dusk and sets his tools in their place against the wall, and washes the dust of the field from his hands and feet with water from the tall jar, and there is a great plain pleasure in that, in the cool water and the day's work ended and the smell of the supper filling the little house. The children are called in from the last of their play in the lane, reluctant, gathered, settled. The beasts are seen to, watered and foddered and shut safe for the night against the jackals of the desert edge. The lamp is lit, the little dish of oil with its floating wick, and its small warm flame stands up and throws its soft moving light on the mud walls and the low ceiling and the gathered familiar faces, and the house closes around its own small circle of light against the coming dark. And the meal is simple, and it is good, and it is enough. The round, flat loaves, warm still or warmed again. The pot of stewed lentils or beans, thick and savoury with onion and garlic and a little oil. The greens from the garden. The dried fish or, on a good evening, a fresh one grilled over the coals. Dates and figs, sweet from the tree. And the beer, the mild, sweet, thick beer, passed round and drunk deep, food and drink at once, the plain foundation of the day, now as it was in the morning. They sit on the swept floor around the shared dishes in the lamplight and eat with their hands, unhurried, and there is talk now, the easy talk of the day's end, the small news of the fields and the lane and the neighbours, a thing seen, a thing said, a small joke worn smooth with use, the day laid out and looked over and gently folded away. There is no hurry in it, and no want. Whatever the wider world is doing, whatever the king decrees, and the scribe records, and the boats carry up and down the great river in the dark. Here, in this small lamplit room, the whole of the world that matters is present and accounted for, and safe. The man and his wife and the children, and the old one in the corner, fed together. under their own roof. The beasts breathing warm beyond the wall. The granary full in the yard. The little god watching from his niche. The bread is broken and the beer goes round, and the lamp burns low, and the deep animal contentment of the sheltered and the fed and the gathered lies over the little room like a blessing. And one by one, as the talk softens and the meal is done, the family begins, without hurry, to think of sleep. Outside the lamplit house, the dark comes down over the valley, complete and gentle and enormous, and the village folds itself away into it, house by house, sound by sound, in the old unchanging order of the night. The lamps go out, one by one, along the lane, for oil is dear and the day begins before the dawn, and there is no reason to sit up burning light into the dark. The last voices drop and fade, the doors are drawn to, the cooking fires sink to their banked red coals under their blankets of ash, kept just alive for the morning, and the ordinary sounds of the day, which filled the air so steadily that no one heard them, fall silent one after another, and their silence is the truest mark of the night. The creak of the shadoof stopped, the tap of the potter's work and the ring of the craftsman's tools stopped, the calling of the children and the gossip of the women and the endless soft business of the lane, all of it stilled and put away until the light comes back. And into the space the day's sounds leave, the night's own sounds come, small and old and clear. The river, which was there under everything all day and could not be heard for the busyness of the world, comes into its own now, its low, endless voice against the mud banks filling the whole dark valley, patient and ceaseless, the oldest sound there is. A dog barks once, far off, at nothing, and thinks better of it. Out in the marshes, the frogs take up their patient throbbing chorus, and a night bird calls and calls again, and is answered. From the desert edge, thin and far and not quite unfriendly, comes the yip of a jackal, and the beasts in the byre shift and are still. And under it all, the great silence of the country lies deep and soft, the silence of a land with no cities near, no lamps pushing back the dark, a land given wholly over, each night, to the river and the stars. The household sleeps. On the flat roof in the warm nights, or on the mats in the cool room in the winter, the family lies down together in the dark, the man and his wife and the children and the old one, close, breathing slow, and near them beyond the low wall the beasts breathe too, so that the whole household passes into the night, as it passed the last one and will pass the next, one warm, sheltered, sleeping thing under one low roof held in the dark. The little god keeps his watch from the wall. The banked fire glows faint red in the hearth, and the night deepens, and the river runs on, and the great slow wheel of the dark turns quietly on toward another dawn. Above the sleeping valley, above the sleeping village, above the small, warm house and all the souls asleep in it, safe. And over the sleeping valley, over the dark river and the dark fields and the low roofs, the sky opens and the stars come out, in a blackness and a multitude that no later, brighter age will ever quite know, and they are, to the people of the river, not cold and far, but near and living and full of meaning, the great slow-turning ceiling of their nights. There is nothing to dim them here. No city glows on any horizon. When the moon is down, the dark is total, And into that total dark the stars come out past all counting, thick as spilled grain across the whole vault of the sky, hanging so close and so bright over the flat black land that a man lying on his roof feels he could nearly reach up into them. And down the very middle of the sky runs the great pale river of light. The countless stars gathered into a shining band from one horizon to the other, and the people look up at it and see, of course, a river. A heavenly Nile flowing across the sky as their own Nile flows across the land, so that above and below are the same two great rivers, one of water and one of light. And the boats of the gods sail the upper one as the boats of men sail the lower. For the sky is a living thing to them, and full of stories. The whole vault is the body of the sky goddess arched over the world, her fingers and toes at the four horizons, her belly spangled with the stars, swallowing the sun each dusk in the west and giving birth to it again each dawn in the east, so that the night itself is the inside of a vast and gentle and protecting body, bent over the sleeping land. The stars are gods and the blessed dead, sailing their eternal courses. The bright unwearying ones in the north that never set, that wheel slowly forever around the still point of the pole and never sink below the earth, are the imperishable ones, the undying. And to become one of them, to sail forever in that changeless northern sky, is among the dearest hopes a soul can hold. And the priests who watch the sky know its turning as the farmer knows his field, and read in the rising of one great bright star low in the dawn before the flood, the very coming of the inundation itself, so that the sky foretells the river, and the year is written overhead, in light before it is written on the land in water. But the man on his roof knows little of the priest's fine reckonings, and needs little. He knows the bright ones by their old familiar names, and the shapes they make, and the slow procession of them across the seasons, the ones that belong to the harvest, and the ones that belong to the flood. He knows that they have wheeled just so above this river since before his grandfather's grandfather, and will wheel so long after his grandsons, unchanging, faithful, turning through the same great slow circle night after night after night. And there is in that a comfort as deep as any he owns, the same comfort he takes from the daily sun and the yearly flood, that the world is ordered and turning and reliable, that the great lights come out each night in their appointed places and move in their appointed ways, and that he lies here beneath them, small and safe and held, one warm sleeping speck under the whole slow turning glory of the ancient and unhurried sky. And now it is very late and very still, and there is nothing left in the whole night that asks anything of anyone, and the last thing to do, the easiest thing, the thing the whole long day has been quietly leading toward, is simply to let go and sink and sleep. The house is dark and warm. The family lies close in the soft dark, the breathing all around, slow and deep and even, the children already gone down into sleep, the old one gone, the beast settled and still beyond the wall. There is nothing to keep watch for. The door is barred, the fire is banked, the granary is full, the little god keeps his patient watch from the wall. The work of the day is done. All of it, the water led and the field tended and the bread baked and the meal eaten and the beasts shut safe, done and put away, and there is nothing now but the warm dark and the slow breathing and the low endless voice of the river under everything, going on, patient and ceaseless and kind. Let it carry you now, that old soft sound, the way it carries the sleeping village, the way it has carried every sleeper on its banks since the beginning of the world. There is nothing to hold on to and nothing to follow. The day is behind you, safe and complete. The stars are turning slowly overhead, the river is running quietly on toward its far-off sea, and it is in no hurry, and neither, now, are you. Feel how heavy the body has become, how warm, how still. Feel the breath going slower and slower, deep and easy, each one a little softer than the last. The mind is drifting now, letting the day dissolve, letting the pictures blur and fade and float away, the golden field, the shining water, the low red fire, all of it softening, all of it going quiet and dim and far. There is only the warm dark now. Only the breath, only the slow, low, endless sound of the river going on, and the stars turn slowly overhead, and the river runs softly on, and the night holds you, warm and safe and deep, and you drift, and you sink, and you sleep, and sleep, and sleep.